not like the widget making factory,
right,
the missionary creating factory, that's the local church. This idea that like, I just want to invest in the missionaries.
I know.
It's just like,
you've jumped 95% of the process to get to the most exciting part, which it is the most exciting part. Like, we love to send, right. But we're just going to be analytical enough to know, like, hey, that college student that just stood up to go to India, we met them as a junior in high school because they came to the whatever overnighter, and we bought a bunch of pizza for that. Whoever's money bought the pizza is in direct line with that missionary that went out. And we just try to really connect that.
This is Breaking Barriers, where we help pastors and churches grow so that they can go.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Breaking Barriers podcast. I'm Pastor Bobby. I'm here with Pastor Andrew, and today, over the next probably couple episodes, we're going to be talking about what it looks like to do a generosity initiative in your church, and we'll talk about why this is important, and also just some general principles around developing generosity, stewardship in your people. This is one of those things, in my experience, that it's kind of like you don't realize you need it till you need it. And a lot of guys maybe plant churches, and this is not at the front of their mind until they realize, man, this is something I need to develop in my people more, but maybe I haven't even talked about this for a couple of years. And so we've done a lot of coaching with different churches. We have benefited from a lot of coaching also around this stuff, and there's people that have blessed us a ton and pouring into us. So yeah, I'll turn over to Pastor Andrew, what it looks like to walk through generosity initiative.
Yeah, today we're going to do five kind of axioms of a generosity initiative. Some of the stuff is just things that we need to be aware of, and then some of it I think is things that we need to try to put into practice. So we'll just go ahead and jump right into them. The first one is probably the most important one, I would say, and that is to really think about the heart posture in a generosity initiative. So the way I've labeled this is, number one, generosity initiatives are discipleship initiatives. Yes, generosity initiatives are about raising money, but they are also about raising maturity. Yes, it's about currency, but it's also about spiritual fervency. And I think that this is, but if you get this wrong, none of the rest of it's going to go right. So it's probably worth camping on this for a little bit. But I think sometimes pastors can feel sort of icky when it comes to thinking about generosity, certainly a generosity initiative where you're asking people to make a commitment and, to really forecast what they think that they're praying that God would allow them to be able to give. Maybe somebody feels like a slick salesman. And I've said this before, but it's possible that if you feel like an icky kind of slick salesman, it might be that's because that's what you're being. If what you're trying to do is manipulate people and to get them to do your thing, give money so you can build your whatever, or get money so you can plant the next whatever, it's like, yeah, that is kind of being a salesman. I mean, you're just trying to get them to do your thing. Of course, the other way that we talk about this a lot on the Breaking Barriers podcast is, if we become convinced that this is the best thing for their individual growth and their family's growth in their maturity and in their spiritual fervency, then it really begins to change the way that we feel about calling our people, up to generosity and even stepping up to the plate in a generosity initiative. We talk a lot about different passages of scripture. I don't know if you want to jump on these, Bob, but we talk about, for example, the rich young ruler. I mean, the principle of that being that, Jesus kind of goes directly to the heart. That's what giving does, right? I mean, it really gets directly to the heart, and it helps us see where maybe some of our idols are.
Yeah, I think this idea goes back to, a lot of times I think when we think about the way somebody gets involved in a church and the way somebody's discipled, a lot of times we think, man, they take these kind of baby steps first of maybe serving, maybe they get to a community group, maybe they go to a Sunday school class. And oftentimes we think, okay, after X amount of months, then, a year later, somebody's going to actually start giving. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, sometimes that's just how it happens. That's just how it naturally happens. But the idea, especially like the rich young ruler, Matthew 6:21, where, your heart kind of follows your treasure. Mm-hmm. There's a way to talk about money and giving that is kind of a beeline to the heart, because, and this is the reason that the Bible talks about money so much and stewardship so much. Money has a way of, maybe being an idol that other things don't. You can control a lot of stuff in your life, especially in the 21st century America, with money. It can make you feel like, hey, I'm going to protect myself from this thing, or I'm going to provide security for myself, or whatever it may be. And it's very easy that thing can actually be in the place of God. And that's why, Jesus talks about it so much. And that's why you can really disciple your people. Because sometimes when we think about Generosity Initiative, we think, okay, you do something like Generosity Initiative just to be able to raise money for stuff that the church wants to do, without realizing, no, this is actually really good for people, because especially in America, we live in a very consumeristic type society where lots of people rely on their money for security in a very deep level. So I think that's what we mean, when you talk about generosity fuels the mission and forms the heart. It's not just about the things we're doing, right? Like we're not just like raising money to do this thing, but in some ways the primary thing we're trying to do first is just like form people's hearts.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it is about the mission. You never want to say, hey, it's not about the money. It's just about the heart.
Right.
Because it's like there's nothing else in Christianity that is that way. I mean, there's always an output to any spiritual input, right? The output, we have a spiritual input of God is gracious with us. Man, the output is we want to be a gracious person to others.
Right.
The input then of God being generous with us and allowing us to have more than we need is that we would be generous with it. We would actually give it. So it's not, you don't want to say, hey, it's not about the money. It's just about the heart, nor do you want to say it's just about the money. It's not about the heart. It's about both of those things, because as we've said, generosity forms the disciple and it fuels the mission. What we want in our people, and one of the reasons why we have chosen a couple times now, 3 times now in almost 13 years, we have chosen to engage in longer form discipleship initiatives that are around generosity and have numbers attached to them and that kind of thing. One of the reasons why we have been so willing to do that, part of it is because in a growing church, man, we have a lot of needs, and we have a lot of expansion that needs to happen in different areas. And our church, was a church plant 12 and a half years ago, and so we don't have inherited wealth over generations and buildings and things like that. So we're having to build all that stuff, which is great. God's given us that opportunity to do that. But the other part of it, of course, is that if we as pastors know that the goal is not to get people to give 10%, it's to get them to steward 100% of their life, then, having rhythmic seasons of engaging, that in a really deep way, is going to open our folks up to so many other things. I mean, how many stories like this do we have where someone, because of our last one was called Deeper, because of our Deeper initiative, they began to give for the first time, or they raised their giving to a tithe level, or maybe they went beyond the tithe, or maybe they started giving out of, they gave something significant out of stored assets, some kind of gift that they gave. And then the next thing they're also thinking about going on a mission trip. They decide to host a small group, right? And it's because, man, that God used sort of this discipleship journey to dethrone that major idol. And when they open their hands, God has begun to fill their hands with some other things in their life.
Yeah, and I would say that, that's what the leadership team and the lead pastor of the church has to wrestle with, that he actually believes that. And I think maybe that's kind of the issue sometimes, maybe God has some work to do in his own heart, because you have a lot of guys that are very hesitant about doing something like this. And maybe they're not just like the slick salesman, but they get paid by the church. Maybe there's some hang-ups from the way that they were raised, to think about money, or the way somebody else has talked about money. So I do think sometimes people have to kind of wrestle in their own heart, man, is generosity a thing that God is using in your heart to grow you and disciple you? Right. Because if it's not, then it's gonna be tough to stand up and try to convince everybody, hey, this is one of the primary levers of discipleship.
For sure. I mean, we've got to wrestle with, is generosity a fruit of maturity, or is it also a pathway to maturity? And guys that see it only as a fruit of maturity, I think, have a hard time calling people to it because they're like, well, this should be happening organically. This feels slick and kind of salesman-y if I'm like putting numbers and a real great marketing thing around this or whatever. I think when guys begin to believe this is a pathway to maturity and maybe one of the greatest levers that we can pull, then it becomes a lot easier because we're like, hey, I want what's best for them. And what's best for them is to be able to dethrone this idol and to start to give.
For sure.
The second, go ahead.
I was just going to say,
Yeah.
let me just take a sec and kind of define discipleship initiative. Just because there may be some people that are a little bit like,
that's
okay,
right.
what exactly does that mean? I think when we're saying discipleship initiative, like every church should be doing like discipleship through generosity every week, right? Like you're giving. I mean, that's been going back for the last 2,000 years, right? Taking up an offering, that sort of thing. Discipleship initiative is kind of expand above that and say, man, what is the vision of where the church is going? Where do we feel like God is leading us over the next couple of years? Most of our churches don't have the resources to just stand up in 1 week's time and be like, hey, let's raise the money for the vision over the next couple of years. That's why we need to do something that's, over the course of a year, over the course of 2 years. And so when we've done discipleship initiatives, we've done two-year initiatives where you prepare 3 or 4 months ahead of time, and we did a 1-year initiative where we're laying out the vision. Here's where the church is going, and we're calling people to think about their generosity over the next year. People do these in different ways. I'd say the most common is a 2-year initiative. I've heard of 3-year initiatives, and we've also done a 1-year initiative just because that's the situation we were in. So that gives somebody at least a little bit of a framework when we say discipleship initiative.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth mentioning, Bobby, that we're specifically talking about a one fund idea. So where that, whether that's a year or 2 years, you're casting a vision for the church of, hey, as an output of this spiritual input, we're hoping to see X amount of dollars raised over the next 2 years, usually 25 months because you do 3 Decembers. And, if we see that hit, then we're going to get into where that money is going. That actually leads directly into the next thing here. So generosity initiatives are discipleship initiatives, number one, but number two is generosity initiatives are very strategic. And I feel like God pairs these things up, but we also have an opportunity to shepherd our people well and to pair them up and really try to use generosity initiatives, discipleship initiatives around generosity at very strategic times and in strategic ways. One of the verses we go back to a lot at Breaking Barriers is Psalm 78:72, where the Bible says that he shepherded with with integrity of heart and skilled hands. And that's what we want from the kings. That's what we want from the leaders of the church, is what we want from leaders in Christian leaders in business or coaches or pastors, is that we would have integrity of heart and have skilled hands. And I think that the skilled hands part and the integrity of heart part really, but specifically the skilled hands part comes in as pastors begin to decide, hey, if our people respond to this generosity initiative, and just like our churches may go through a season of deep prayer, or they may go through a season of deep mission and deep evangelism, we're going into a season of deep discipleship through generosity. If they respond, how are we going to get maximum impact from their response? And how are we going to leverage that that output of dollars to the absolute max best ability we can to get the biggest bang for the kingdom that we can? And normally these things sort of go in 3 parts, right? So you're going to be talking about, hey, if the church comes together and we respond, we're going to end up doing sort of ongoing ministry for the next 2 years. We're going to do probably some type of very specific project that a lot of times in our day and age is like, just building expansion, planting something, some kind of mission endeavor. And then the third thing is probably going to be some new ministry stuff that you're hoping to see that maybe God is given to you. So one way to think about this is like, I'll throw it to you, probably a solid half of whatever you're going to try to raise over 2 years is going to be in that bucket of just, man, it's ongoing ministry. How do we keep our people excited about what is just a day in, day out ministry, versus some of the hot kind of a new building or when really we know that keeping the lights on and the pastor's paid and kids going to camp, like that is the engine that produces the rest of this stuff. You know, so how do we get them to see it as a one fund, everything's missions dollars, stay excited about that stuff?
Yeah, I think that's really important because I don't know where this came from. Maybe there's some legitimacy to this in like the nonprofit world, but people are always like, yeah, you know, how much of the money is going to the actual, you know, ministry, right? Or how much is going to the actual like projects.
Right.
You hear this in the like some nonprofit that's, you know, building wells in Africa. It's always like, man, you know, I don't want the money going to staff. I want to make sure it's going to the wells, right? Or feeding people or whatever.
Right.
And maybe there's some legitimacy, right? If there's some organization that's like 99.9% just goes to like the staffing and the ministry is not really happening. But we try to help people to see, you know, and this is why we use the idea of like a flywheel, just like a simplistic way to explain what it is we're trying to do. We're trying to get people, because we feel like this is going to help them grow and the church is going to grow, to gather as a church, you know, attend and serve, to group together, to give time, talent, treasure, and then ultimately to, you know, live on mission, plant churches, international missions, all of that. And then hopefully that's going to kind of continue to, you know, grow the church in terms of the gathering, and it's just going to repeat itself. We try to really help people to see, and we still get questions from people, you know, how, you know, I want to designate money here, or you know, how much of this goes to X. But we wouldn't have a light bill if we didn't think it contributed to what it is that we're trying to do.
Right.
We wouldn't have a staff position. We wouldn't have a building. You know, like the things that people don't see, you know, you think about, you know, way back in the day when I think it was David Platt talking about like, man, we got to remove the goldfish from the kids ministry or whatever.
Right.
Whatever we're doing in the kids ministry, we think it's going to help to disciple the kids and do what it is that we're trying to do. So we wouldn't be spending money on something if we didn't think it contributed to the mission.
Right.
And we just try to help people to see that, you know, like staffing, you know, building expenses, you know, staffing for sending, actual sending money to sending. I mean, it's all to us the exact same bucket of, because our ultimate measurement is not how much money went here, how much money went here. Our ultimate measurement is, man, how many people were baptized? You know, how many people got into a community group? You know, how many students are going to student ministry? How many college students are willing to go on a church plant? Like, we're trying to measure the outcomes of all these things. Yeah. And so I just think, you know, that's where a one fund can be helpful. But even if you're not in a one fund, it's good to help people to see, man, all this money is going towards our mission.
Yeah, I mean, you want to put it in spiritual terms, but it's almost like, hey, the money that goes into the factory that creates the widget, you know, it is, you know, whether it's producing the steam in the engine or it's the, you know, it's producing a roof over the head or whatever, like whatever that engine is that produces the thing you're trying to produce, you know, that's not wasted money. It's like that money is what produced. And so when we see, like, we have people stand up on stage to go to the mission field, you know, and I try really hard to connect all of that together, because what a lot of people want to do is they want to say like, well, I just want my money to go straight to the mission field, like give it directly to like an agency that's taking it overseas. And you're kind of like, hey, you've short-circuited 95% of this process to get to the very end. That's cool. But those people don't ever stand on the stage to end up going to the mission field if there wasn't years and years and years of that factory producing, you know, things in their life that ended up pushing them to maturity.
If there's not like the widget making factory,
right,
the missionary creating factory, that's the local church. This idea that like, I just want to invest in the missionaries.
I know.
It's just like,
you've jumped 95% of the process to get to the most exciting part, which it is the most exciting part. Like, we love to send, you know, but we're just going to be analytical enough to know, like, hey, that college student that just stood up to go to India, we met them as a junior in high school because they came to the whatever overnighter, and we bought a bunch of pizza for that. Whoever's money bought the pizza is in direct line with that missionary that went out. And we just try to really connect that. And so the ongoing ministry stuff is so important. The second thing, though, I think is really good, and it's strategic. Like, most people that I've ever seen that do a discipleship initiative, and God lines this up, but I think it's also good leadership. Remember Psalm 78, skilled hands. You're doing it at a time that is strategic for your church. So you're getting two birds with one stone. It would always be right to teach our people to be generous. but then you're also doing it at a very strategic time and a lot of times in the West, it is just straight up like, man, it's time for some type of facility expansion or it's time to plant something, or it's time to maybe do a new mission endeavor or whatever, but it's some project, that we have. And I just think it's important to realize like what, those projects that we have, sometimes they cost a lot of money, but it is still part of the process of widget making. So for example, for us, I think a lot of people were in this boat, so we'll just use our example. For us, the last one we did, it was a facility expansion. We built a brand new campus. We needed a lot of money for that campus. So we said, hey, of our pie that we're trying to raise over 2 years, which was $30 million, half of that is going to the ongoing ministry that create, is what we're doing now. But I think 10 million of it or something like that was going to this idea of the new campus.
Basically a third of it.
Yeah. Going to the new campus. And that part is very expensive, and there's a strategic time to raise that money to get it in place. Now, one thing that people will say is they'll say, well, the church is spending $10 million on a facility that's all about buildings. Just look where their money is, And one thing I would say about that is, man, in our normal lives, guys, the things that are the most expensive doesn't mean they're the most important.
Yeah.
My mortgage is the most expensive thing that I pay. But if you ask me the most important thing that I pay, if I was to just like start listing from top to bottom in terms of my family's health, I'd probably be like, well, I don't know. I think our Y membership is pretty important. That Y membership's like $75 a month. But I think it probably matters a ton for our health. You understand what I'm saying? Like, so just because it's the most expensive doesn't mean it's the most important. But a lot of times these projects are an opportunity to try to take a big bite at something that is important. And it's pretty expensive,
Yeah. The funny thing is, I think people because we know people like this, I'm literally just friends with people like this, they're like, oh, I don't want to invest in like the brick and mortar stuff,
Right.
But it's like when they think about their own life, like they have no problem investing in brick and mortar, right? Why? Well, because they want the relationship with their kids to be good. They want their kids to grow up in a safe place. It's not about the house. Like it's almost never about the house.
Right.
Man, we want to host a community group here. Like all the stuff that we want to do. It's like, well, yeah, the brick and mortar is for what it is that you're trying to do.
Right.
And you're investing in the future. I mean, that's what that category 2 is all about. Like, hey, we got to invest in the ministry that's happening right now, and you got to be careful with that. Kind of going back to number 1, you got to be very careful that you don't make the initiative all about the future and kind of forget about like what it is that's happening right now. Because people are not at your church for what's happening in the future. They're at your church right now because their kids are getting discipled, or they're a college student, or they're in the student ministry. Like they're at the church for the here and now. So you got to continue to invest in that. But yeah, like you're saying, a facility or something like that, this is why it's strategic to do an initiative, because just like buying a house or doing something big in your life, most of us we're not in the position to just do it right now. Like it's going to require, hey,
right.
After, you get married, you think about buying a house. Most of the time, unless you just have like inherited wealth, you can't just be like, all right, let's go buy a house. It's like, okay, well, we got to save for the next 2 or 3 years.
You could back in 2008, 2007.
If you caught it, yeah.
You didn't have to have no money back then.
You'd be pretty scared of
pretty terrible what happened too. Yeah, I think, man, all that's right. And I think the third thing here I would say is, you want to have some of that money designated toward new ministry opportunities. This is something people get excited about, things that are going to be in the future, new church plants, foster care and adoption, something that you're doing in the city around homelessness, missions. And I think that those 3 things combining, ongoing mission, some type of pretty serious project that you're going to do, and then some real dreaming about some future ministry that will happen, particularly if the first 2 happen well. I just think that sets you up to be very strategic. The thing that I really wanted to get across to guys listening to this is I think you really have to just try to get ahead and put yourself in the shoes of the person who doesn't naturally think about it this way, because, what many people are going to do is they're going to get excited about the future projects or the future ministry, and they're not going to see them in concert with the ongoing ministry that you're doing now. And there's a real opportunity for us to try to help them with that. help them to see. One thing we say at Mercy Hill is like, hey, every dollar's a missions dollar, man. It's a kingdom dollar. Whether you bought the pizza for the kid that eventually became whatever, or whether you actually gave directly to the cooperative program, like it's all going to end up being in this missions bucket if you're in a church that is thinking about it that way and trying to produce missionaries.
Yeah, I would add too, like, because I think this is just important to say. This is why we do Breaking Barriers. And this is not a knock against any pastors, but what you're explaining, like, man, investing in the ministry now and investing in a project and then investing in the future, mm-hmm. It's not the easiest thing to do in terms of just coming up with what that stuff is. Because there's a lot of pastors, I think, if we were to sit down with them right now and be like, hey, man, let's just assume all the money you want to come in is going to come in over the next 3 years. Right. How exactly are you going to spend it? Like, what is your vision? What is the here and now, and what is the stuff for the future? So, yeah, I would just say, like, for some guys, maybe the shift today is to, like, man, begin to kind of think about that stuff more. There's a lot of pastors that are just not very kind of strategic in nature, and even if you handed them the money, they wouldn't know what to do with it.
Right.
So,
and it's all a matter of scale too. Like, I remember being with Chris Hodges one time in a one-day event, and he said, I never leave home without $400 million of vision in my back pocket. And I just was like, I thought I was doing good to lay out, like, hey man, if we have a few $1 million, here's what we would do. I was in the same boat you're talking about on a different scale. Like, if somebody would have said, hey man, here's $100 million, what would you do with it? I wouldn't have had an answer. So I try to have an answer to that now. I try to have, things that would add up, and man, we could do a lot with this stuff for the kingdom. So I think it's a really good point,